Welcome back one and all to the Grey Havens, and in this video we're going to look at the top 10 things from The Lord of the Rings that were left out of the movies. Look, it's just a given that lots of things are going to have to be cut when you adapt a set of books into film. But even with the trilogy clocking in at almost 12 hours of Middle-earth greatness, there are still dozens of important scenes from the books that were left on the cutting room floors. Today, we're going to talk about the top 10 things that we think were the most noteworthy. Now for this video, we're going to be referencing the extended edition of the films, so if you're still watching the original theatrical cuts, well, I'm sorry. Now without further ado, let's jump right into the top 10 things from The Lord of the Rings that were left out of the movies. Let's kick things off with the barrow wight, surely the creepiest of our top 10. Just outside the borders of the Shire, our four hobbits were walking through the forest on their way to the village of Bree to meet up with Gandalf, but they became lost and mistakenly wandered onto the crest of a small hill, surrounded by a ring of huge standing stones, reminiscent of Stonehenge. They immediately lost consciousness and awoke deep, deep underground in the tomb of a barrow wight. The barrow wight was a ghost of an ancient king, buried in a mighty tomb surrounded by all of his riches. But so great was his greed in life that his spirit lingered in death, guarding his possessions for all of time. For you see, inside his tomb, time had stopped. It's forever the day in which he was buried. Now Frodo awoke to find all four hobbits dressed in ancient clothing, lying on the cold floor and unable to move or scream out. To his horror, we see a skeletal hand of white bone crawling across the floor toward them, ready to grab a large sword that lay across their throats and mercilessly behead them. It was only by the help of their friend, Tom Bombadil, that they escaped with their lives. While we are on the topic of the barrow wight, let's talk about the daggers that they found there. After their friend Tom Bombadil chased off the wight, they found 4 blades among the ancient king's treasures. The 4 hobbits took these as short swords in case they should run into any more trouble, but they had no idea just how meaningful this would be. The hobbits were completely unaware, but centuries ago the men of Arnor had a great war against the Witch King and his country of Angmar. While they were great warriors, they just could not defeat the Witch King. Normal weapons seemed to have no effect on him. They eventually were able to smith magical blades, daggers, specifically crafted to hurt the Witch King, but were defeated before they could use them. Now all those blades had long ago perished and rusted away, save the 4 that just happened to be preserved in the timeless tomb of that barrow wight. And as chance would have it, Merry carried that small blade from the edge of the Shire, halfway across the world and through countless adventures, till at last he found himself beside the Witch King during the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, holding perhaps the only weapon that could actually hurt him, and he struck the deciding blow. The emotional heart of the films center around 4 simple hobbits, best friends, trying to help each other. But in the books, did you know there were actually 5 hobbits? That's right, Sam, Frodo, Merry, Pippin, and their good friend, Fatty Bolger. 5 of them set off from the Shire on a grand adventure to save Middle-earth. Here was their plan. They would pretend that Frodo was moving to a new house in Crickhollow, near the edge of the Shire. From there, Sam, Frodo, Merry, and Pippin would secretly sneak off and head to the village of Bree to meet Gandalf at the Prancing Pony, while Fatty Bolger would stay behind at Crickhollow and keep up the illusion that all 5 were still living there. So we bowed out of the story pretty early on. But that's not to say his part was not still extremely important. In the early hours after midnight, the house at Crickhollow was violently attacked by 3 Nazgul looking to kill the hobbits and take the ring. Luckily, Fatty Bolger was one step ahead. He had fled through a back door and raised the alarm in Buckland. Loud bells started to ring as hobbits emerged from their houses, ready to protect their homes, and the Nazgul fled away as fast as their horses could carry them. Coming in at number 7, in the books, orcs are deathly afraid of sunlight. That's right, they cannot go out in the day. That's why they live in dark places, like the Mayans of Moria or underground. They literally cannot function in daylight. This plays a huge role in the Battle of Minas Tirith. You see, Sauron has control of Mount Doom and causes it to erupt, propelling incredible amounts of ash into the air. This enormous volcanic cloud slowly spreads out from Mordor, blocking out the sun until it reaches all the way to Minas Tirith, covering it in an overcast twilight of smoky gray. And the orcs march underneath this ash cloud. It enables them to fight Gondor during the day. The great battle continues all throughout the night, but unnoticed to everyone, a soft wind started blowing from the west just before dawn, gently pushing the great ash cloud away from the city. When the riders of Rohan blew their great horns, not only were the orcs startled to see the charge of Theoden King and his knights, but the sun suddenly rose over the mountaintops and shone straight through where the ash cloud had previously been. In the light of the sun, the orcs lost heart and fled the field of battle. In the films, Saruman meets his end by falling from the Tower of Isengard to his death. In the books, however, this never happens. Our heroes actually leave Saruman locked inside of the Tower of Orthanc, a prisoner there until the end of the war. But Saruman eventually escapes and secretly travels to the Shire, where he does a great evil. He hires a mob of thugs and bullies and completely takes over the place. He pulls up all the trees, destroys the lands, pollutes the rivers and airs, burns all the fields, and generally just tortures everyone. It's actually one of the saddest parts of the narrative, for the Hobbit's primary motivation had been to protect the Shire. When Merry, Pippin, Sam, and Frodo eventually return, they immediately take charge, form an army of hobbits, and lead them into battle to win back their freedom. It's here in the Shire that Saruman is ultimately killed and passes away. This happens just after Sam fights the giant spider, Shelob. Frodo had been poisoned and taken captive to the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and Sam followed, trying to save his friend. But while wearing the ring, Sam got his first view of the plain of Gorgoroth in Mordor, and it took his breath away. Never before had he seen a land so tortured, so bereft of growing things, a desert of lifeless ash. Remember, Sam's a gardener, and so it was heartbreaking. But then the ring started to tempt our hero. Wild fantasies arose in his mind as he began to think of Samwise, the master gardener. He imagined himself in command of an army of gardeners to plant forests and create rivers by his design. He would order the trees and grasses, and all the world would become his garden. Flowers would bloom at his command. He would terraform the entire face of his world and order all life. Sam never realized it, but this was the ring tempting him. But he simply took a deep breath, humbly laughed at himself, and went on his way to save his friend. Samwise Gamgee was a baller. In the films, when we meet Bilbo again in Rivendell, he is aged considerably, and is essentially an old hobbit retiring in peace. But in the books, well, Bilbo is a total rock star. He's performing poetry for all the elves, he's the honored guest of Elrond, he's a renowned adventurer and scholar, and he's still as fiery and awesome as the day he left. At the Council of Elrond, he is called to the front to give everyone a long and detailed description of how he found the ring, how it works, his encounters with Gollum, everything. He's really one of the centerpieces of the whole discussion. Eventually, the council comes to the sobering conclusion that someone must carry the ring deep into Mordor. In the films, this immediately starts a loud argument. In the books, however, it's quite different. The council sits in silence, contemplating this suicide mission that they are presented with. Each person is deep in thought and fearful in hesitation. No one would agree to such an impossible journey. But then the silence is broken, and we witness a positively epic moment from Bilbo Baggins of Bag End as he stands up and proclaims, "I see where this is going. I started this whole thing, and it's up to me to finish it." Bilbo's the only one courageous and adventurous enough to straight up volunteer. It's quickly decided that he is just too old to actually travel to Mordor. But had it been a few decades earlier, oh yeah, Bilbo would have gotten it done. Dragons, giant spiders, trolls, armies of orcs. Bilbo had beaten them all before. Just another day's work for this epic hobbit. On to number 3. In the films, Gandalf famously confronts the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and then a second time on the peak of Zir-Zidgil, where he kills the Balrog and throws it down in ruin. But in the books, did you know Gandalf actually confronts the Balrog a third time? It's his very first encounter, before he even knows what it is, that is left out of the movies. Just after the fight with the cave troll in the mines of Moria, the Fellowship sprinted through a passageway and closed a heavy door behind them, hoping to slow the orc pursuit. Gandalf placed a great spell on that door so that it could never be opened. But then, from the other side of the door, he suddenly feels an ancient and powerful presence. The beam countered his locking spell and started to force the door open. Gandalf was shocked. Never before had he felt such opposition. The only beings in Middle-earth that should have been able to challenge him like this would have been Saruman or Sauron. Who was this? What follows is a great battle of wills, as the Balrog and the wizard fought one another through the closed door. So great was the pressure of this invisible war, however, that the entire passageway eventually collapsed and caved in, sealing the door shut forever and allowing the Fellowship time to escape to the bridge of Khazad-dûm. In the movie, we see Samwise Gamgee have an epic fight with Shelob, the giant spider. And while yes, in the books Sam does heroically confront Shelob in the end, before this, there is an incredible sequence where Frodo stands up to Shelob. It occurs deep in the tunnels under Cirith Ungol, and it's one of my favorite parts of the book. Sam and Frodo were walking in silence through the utter, complete darkness in that place, and with the sensory deprivation, they had lost all sense of time. The darkness was so thick that it started to invade their very mind. But all at once, their hearts stopped, because behind them in the tunnel, they heard an unmistakable sound of something moving, of something huge. They both started scrambling forward as fast as they could down the dark tunnel to escape the threat. And Shelob followed them, purposefully making lots of noise to scare them. She could have easily outrun them if she wanted to, but was savoring and enjoying every second of playing with her prey. Realizing that escape was impossible, Frodo did arguably the most epic move of the entire trilogy. He stopped, turned around, held the star glass high over his head, and stood his ground. Shelob hesitated. What was this? She had fought great human heroes of old and elvish champions, but no one had ever stood up to her before. And somehow this little thing had captured a very star from the heavens and brought it down into her eternal darkness, holding it in his hand. And then we see Frodo slowly pull Sting from its scabbard, stares directly at Shelob, and takes one step forward. Not the leap of a human hero or charge of an ancient champion, but one small hobbit step. Shelob loses her courage, turns around, and runs away. Sam said it was the bravest thing he ever saw. Well, anyone that's read the books could probably have guessed that this was going to sit at the top of our list, but it's here for a good reason. Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is one of the most memorable and distinct characters in the entire narrative. He is silly, he's mysterious, he's musical, he's uber powerful, super ancient, and altogether just a joy to be around. The hobbits encounter Tom Bombadil in the Old Forest, just on the border of the Shire. When they get attacked by a willow tree, I know, trust me, it makes sense, Tom just happens to dance by and save them. He then gives them a much-needed rest in his home for a few days before they continue on their journey. When our hobbits again get into trouble with the barrow wight, it's Tom that comes again to save them, this time by singing the wight away. Honestly, Tom is pretty difficult to describe and might just be completely unfilmable, but is absolutely one of the best parts of Fellowship and truly deserves his spot on the top of our list. Well, there you have it, our top 10 things from The Lord of the Rings that were left out of the movies. What did you think of our list? Are there things that you feel that we left out of our video? Any fans of Glorfindel, Prince Omadril, or the Grey Company of Rangers? Leave a note in the comments below and let us know your favorite things that were left out of the Lord of the Rings movies.